NATO and the EU have stepped up their cooperation on dealing with hybrid threats with a special focus on countering cyber attacks. And they are also closely cooperating with different partners, such as Ukraine. Hybrid threat actors, either state or non-state, seek to exploit the vulnerabilities of these to their own advantage by using, in a coordinated way, a mixture of measures like diplomatic, military, economic, technological, while remaining below the threshold of the formal warfare. Examples are the hindering of democratic decision-making processes by massive disinformation campaigns, using social media to control the political narrative or to radicalize, recruit, and direct proxy actors. And in this digitalization and advanced technology age, emerging hybrid and cyber threats are mostly high-tech. And the new technologies provide not only new power of armaments, but also the ability to exploit weak points in all spheres of functioning of a state. New technologies allow the possibility to achieve strategic goals by unconventional and cognitive effects, such as technologies of social influence and manipulation, cybersphere, disinformation, and possibilities of significant damage of a state's control systems. And this has been also the case, particularly in the context of the current COVID-19 pandemic. Technologies such as social media made it possible for an actor to remotely influence all main institutions and infrastructure of a state. It formed a basis for unconventional invasions of territory, often even without the use of the conventional military components. And Ukraine is one of the most affected countries in Europe by these hybrid threats, with its occupied territories and influencing all aspects of its social life, on which our speakers will focus as part of the discussion actually today. Yeah. And facing these threats, how we can build or sustain a Europe at peace and harmony is the question, the open question for debate today. We will have two panel discussions moderated by Mr. John Jacobs, the director of the Atlantic Forum. The first panel will focus on the implications of hybrid threats on the idea of Europe in general. And the second panel will discuss reinforcing European resilience against these threats, targeting specifically Ukraine and beyond. And we have very interesting speakers coming from different backgrounds and organizations, including the EU institutions, the Commission Support Group for Ukraine, European Union Institute for Security Studies from France, and the European Center of Excellence for Countering Hybrid Threats from Finland, which closely cooperates with the EU and NATO. And we have also interesting speakers from Ukraine, the National Academy of the Security Service of Ukraine and Cyber Unit Technologies, and also Belgian and Dutch think tank foundations as well. And two of our speakers will join us online as a part of our hybrid event. And now I don't want to take your time and would like to invite Mr. Yehor Pivovarov, Chargé d'Affaires of Ukraine, to Belgium and Luxembourg for his keynote speech. The floor is yours.
Thank you very much for giving me the floor. Distinguished guests here, ladies and gentlemen. Before I start, firstly, I would like to address my words of high appreciation to co-organizers of today's event, Beyond the Horizon think tank, that has invited Ukrainian embassy in Brussels, which I have already had to this expert discussion. We value your intellectual and practical support in making this event possible. Thank you very much. I also would like to ask our dear colleagues to be actively engaged in today's panel discussions, because the topic is very important for us, taking account of the contemporary situation in the cyberspace. My words of gratitude comes also to my team from the embassy, who practically did almost impossible and applied very much forces to organized my participation. Vlad, you did a great job. Thank you very much. In my opening remarks, I would probably briefly stop on international aspects of the safe cyberspace from the geopolitical point of view. Diplomacy is not only about negotiating. Today, it is more about having practical results and building bridges between allies to protect ourselves from those who do not respect our values and our vision of the future. A safe and predictable future where cyberspace simplifies our life, makes it comfortable, but not for spreading false violence and propaganda. I would like to start by saying that hyperactive development of IT technologies progressively led to the reformatting of internet space. Nowadays, it is no longer a comfortable platform for communication, but also a real weapon. A real weapon which becomes more and more dangerous in hands of hackers and criminals. In fact, we all could testify that cyber attacks become a new method of warfare. Such warfare of new generation is more convenient and much less expensive than the classic war. It is enough to hire a group of high-end IT specialists who, by using specially created software, could break necessary computer servers and deactivate almost any navigation system of any type of weapon. Moreover, unlike classic wars, it is difficult to detect a starting moment of each cyber attack. It is potentially traceless, it is almost invisible, and software can be created by the states or individuals. Ukraine, on its own experience, has convinced itself in the fact that safe cyberspace and existence of reliable mechanisms of international containment and counteracting against cyber attacks organized by state and non-state actors have a crucial role in ensuring peace, stability, and security at the regional and global levels. Ukraine is a strong supporter that the idea of the information and communication technologies, ICT, as we call it, shall be used only as a tool for development, according to the provisions and principles of the United Nations Charter that some states, P5 members, ignore and disrespect. Transparent and inclusive international dialogue based on the principles of openness could stop and prevent the current active usage of ICT as a method of fueling conflicts and hostility. International policy progressively becomes very vulnerable to cyberspace and to cyber attacks. That was confirmed by interference into US, French, German electoral campaigns 5 years ago, and even recently, made, as it was confirmed officially, majorly by Russian hackers. Those insolent crimes show us how cyber state-sponsored criminals are currently trying not only stealing money from your ATM cards or hacking your personal data, but impact over the global agenda and international affairs. Today, as you all know, Ukraine is still facing a Russian military aggression, 7th year still on. A so-called hybrid war initiated by Moscow against our country has multiple dimensions. Cyber attacks became one of its major destructive elements. Since December 2015, Ukrainian governmental institutions and objects of national vital critical infrastructure have been facing an unprecedented number of cyber attacks against our power plants, state institutions, national bank, different organs, ministries, Facebook pages of our governmental officials, etc. In 2014 until today, Ukraine has faced an unprecedented number of all cyber attacks that can be counted in every country of the European Union since the last decade. It makes us all to think who wants the destruction. The answer is obvious. As you can see, it is not a scenario of kind of apocalyptic movie, but it happens now in Europe in the 21st century, and it happens with now, and it happens with Ukraine as majorly with all other countries that are subjects for such attacks. As you can see, ladies and gentlemen, we became a polygon for testing a new cyber warfare methods that later on will be used to impact your life as well, like they have impacted ours. According to our security service expert-led investigations made alongside with the participation of our foreign experts from NATO and EU, of course, to ensure objectivity, all cyber attacks have common features and same one country of origin. Guess which? Collected virus samples give us the right to affirm that it was not a private, but a state-guided special cyber operations to weaken our defense ability and affect our national security. Nowadays, in a COVID epoch, when planet's lifestyle suddenly became teleworking and online functioning, our enemy uses cyber technologies to undermine public trust to state institutions, discredit vaccination campaigns, spread false against vaccines and its efficiency, manipulating with statistics, and sow doubts and uncertainty. Bots, armies of fake Facebook users, thousands of so-called experts every day spread lies about chipping population during vaccination and 5G network impacts on health. Those marasmus you know well. These examples confirm the fact that Ukraine became a purposely Russia-selected object of the organized external cybercrime, which is often as devastating as the regular warfare. Of course, Russia is not the only country in this world which acts as a cyberpunk. You know the rest of the names, of course, but it is the only who does it so insolently and so, frankly, awkwardly. We accepted this serious challenge as a state and mobilized our national resources to respond duly to these hostile acts. In 2016, Ukrainian President had signed a decree that approves the Ukrainian national cybersecurity strategy. It is an important step forward in the field of Ukraine's modernization and resistance to the existing and emerging threats to our national security in the field of cyber. My country, year after year, became much more resilient to these types of attacks. And now we have managed to create a stable cyber defense system, which is not yet perfect, of course, but reliable and flexible enough to react and to proact. With the valuable assistance of our European and American partners, we work closely on building better resilience against Russian cyber attacks in a principle of beneficial cooperation. Technologies versus our unique experience. We share it to improve, to trace, and to hold accountable. In this context, in order to further strengthen international cooperation on countering cyber threats, the international community, to my own experience and to my own opinion, should continue working closely and ensure deep cooperation with the private sector, with the private IT companies. Developing and security of cyberspace, introduction of e-government, security and sustainable function of electronic communications and public electronic information resources are becoming a part of Ukraine's state policy in the field of cybersecurity, shaping our new digital society. Those are our strategic routes that we hope will lead us to success. Finally, no success in this field will be achieved if the civilized world would not invent truly efficient mechanisms to bring the states accused in cyber attacks to justice. Only punishment and international consolidation could minimize the consequences of state-led cyber operations, which will also increase in future. A future where all our life is fitted in the size of a one smartphone. Dear ladies and gentlemen, by concluding, I would like to mention that cybersecurity is a subject of universal and tremendous importance that we will only grow up. We should consolidate our efforts to elaborate common rules of the game, equal for everyone, with purpose to ensure safety for any attempt to discredit such eminent achievement of humanity as computer technologies are. Thus, we are condemned to work together, all of us, state actors, private companies, think tanks, and we should be at one side and build an international and technical intellectual background between our nations and our national experts. Our today's conference is the right step towards this ambition goal. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you, Mr. Fyodorov, for your keynote speech. And I would like to invite the first panelist to the stage to start the discussion.
See how it works, please.
Thank you.
All right, good morning, everyone. Good morning. So my name is John Jacobs, and as was introduced before, I'm here on behalf of the Atlantic Forum. Though I am obligated to say that I'm also a Dutch Army officer, but not speaking on behalf of our Minister of Defense. Actually, I will not be speaking a lot at all because we have an excellent panel today, also in hybrid setting with online and physical presence. But very briefly, as of 2017, I've been involved with the topic of hybrid warfare and found myself becoming the custodian of the Oxford bibliography on hybrid warfare. Hence, I think Horizons invited me to join. Being military, however, I will be very strict on timing, so that's my role for today, so that we can use the Q&A for the interaction with the audience, either physically or online. And in order to do that online, please make sure to tag Beyond Horizons on Twitter or any other social media channel, so that our tech team in the back, again, this is also hybrid, will have the questions pop up on my iPad right here. So assume that's gonna happen, make sure to tag them right away so that the panelists can respond to those questions as well. Now, I want to start with our online speaker who is calling in from Finland at the European Center of Excellence for Countering Hybrid Threats, a joint COE, well, it's a European COE, but with support from NATO as well. And I'll have you trivia know that the Kingdom of Belgium is joining the COE, and tomorrow the NAC will be visiting you. Let's see if we have a contact. I have someone on screen. That team, ready?
Hello, good morning from Helsinki. Do you hear me?
Juka, we can't really just hear you just yet. Bear with us for a moment.
Let's test 1, 2, 3, 4. Do you start hearing me?
Yes, this is perfect. So Juka, I had hoped you could bring us a sort of a setting the stage and very briefly introduce hybrid warfare from your perspective.
Thank you very much. I appreciate this opportunity for basically two purposes. Of course, first and foremost, I can confirm what the previous speaker, the keynote speakers, mentioned about Ukraine being a test laboratory in hybrid warfare, because that's the case. And we here in the European Center of Excellence have been studying Ukrainian case very carefully from many viewpoints, especially maybe our conceptual model, where we have studied the whole hybrid case of Ukraine as an example, but also in many specific fields. Just to mention one, for example, is what is happening in the seafront, where security-related dilemmas can be exploited to economic coercion. This is very effective, unfortunately, and can be utilized elsewhere also. So we have received support from Ukrainian experts so many times in our events, so I want to thank for that. and hope that we can continue this cooperation, and which also then, of course, gives some forums for Ukrainian experiences. Well, just very briefly, the European Center of Excellence for Countering Hybrid Threats is a new installation here in Helsinki. We base our activity on working in networks, and our membership is for states who are members of the European Union or NATO. And we started in 2017 with 9 signatory states, but now we are already up to 30. So the EU and NATO member states have wanted to join in and support our activity. And of course, this whole idea and the terminology of using the word of hybrid threats was based on what was experienced in Crimea and Eastern Ukraine. So I appreciate very much this. This is an interesting approach. Normally, I would be talking some much more sectoral and technical issues, but now I'm happy to have this topic of implications of hybrid threats on the idea of Europe. This is important, and this is very important for Ukrainians also to recognize these questions that I just briefly can address here as signs of idea, because apparently there is a huge global challenge going on between the democratic states and nations versus another selection of governance, and obviously we must have selected our side. And so I would say that if somebody can say there is a systemic Western support to something, I think it will be in future anchored more and more clearly to the standards, following the standards of democracy, because that's in the core of the challenge. So what would be the idea of Europe? The history of the European Union, as most would know, was about the coal and steel union after Second World War. So the idea was that after 2 quite consequent enormous wars, connectivity and shared values should bring together the European nations, so that there would be no more war, at least no more war between France and Germany. And as we have seen, this has worked quite well since the Second World War, because there has been even no idea of that direction, that France and Germany would start threatening each other by military means. And this started a long development, which is shown in the development of European Union and its treaties. And what we have achieved already is a common currency covering the most countries, and a common free movement, the Schengen area. These were big ideas. And now we have standardized so many things, like, let's say, there is no roaming fee anymore inside the European territory for mobile phones. This is advancing slowly but certainly. So, but to concentrate on the real idea of Europe, I would say we need to look at what is democracy, what is the idea of democracy, and that means we will look at it in versus authoritarian regimes. And we are conducting a study right now on resilience, and there we find it important to notify what is democracy, and we find it's not written clearly anywhere. But certainly in the field of democracy, we have separation of powers, the judiciary, government, and the parliament, the lawmaking power, they must be separated clearly. There should be some sort of elections, obviously, from ancient Greece even. We have noticed this, but then it was quite limited. Nowadays, I think every citizen should have the rights to be either a candidate and also a voter freely. And then there are, in EU treaties, we have some definitions, but they very much just state the words of democracy and human rights. So there are a lot of standards that are necessary in the field of democracy, and such are freedom of expression, openness of governance, legal certainty, that you can trust that the laws will be implemented, and that the acts of the authorities must be based on laws that come from the parliament that was legally selected. And very important in practice, presumption of innocence. So that when somebody gets arrested, the burden of evidence is on the side of the state. So nobody should be put in the position where they themselves need to show their innocence. And also physical integrity of citizens. So we have this in 3 dimensions. This is the civil society. We have the institutions that need to follow the democratic principles. And then we have systems where we need to have a market freedom. So now let's look at the adverse acts. We have post-communist governments in Russia and in China too. They had a big problem about how to handle the follow-up of collapse of communism. And now in Russia, long story short, they think they have preserved the whole of their national property by what they did and centralizing the powers, not allowing the oil fields and gas fields to be bought by foreign capital. And a little bit similar, of course, is China, but they have quite well joined the international free trade area, but they are limiting it anyway, so it's not a fair play. So they want to undermine trust in our societies, and we must have decided to maintain our trust. And I would like to now finalize by urging Ukrainian people also to understand that democracy needs to win because it's quality of life and values, and democracy creates the best economic creativity, and people do want democracy. And in order to be solidly supported by the West, one should try to implement the democratic standards in the society. Remember that authoritarian regime, this has been known for centuries by mankind already. Authoritarian regime will first create enormous bureaucracy, and then it will create corruption. And these limit the creativity and activeness of economy and the people. And so democracy in the long run will win, but we'll see at the time scale. I think I used my 10 minutes, so thank you for this, and I'm ready to continue.
Jukka, thank you very much for that, and well, very fine within your 10 minutes. Excellent. We'll move straight on to the physical speakers, starting with, on my right, Nadia Kavalchikova. It's not bad for pronunciation, is it? Who is in charge of transatlantic security at the European Union Institute for Security Studies. But you're also a researcher. Pretty much everything that deals with hybrid warfare. So please take the stage and explain us on your research and your recent findings on what's really now the issue.
Thanks a lot, John, and good morning to everyone. It's very nice to see you in person, but I'm also glad we have an audience following us online, and I hope to receive questions also from you afterwards to engage in a conversation with you all. So as John mentioned, my name is Nadia Kavalchikova. I'm a senior analyst at the EU Institute for Security Studies, which is an EU agency analyzing foreign policy and security policy of the EU. And I focus on transnational security. And hybrid threats are a big part of my portfolio as I look at different dimensions of hybrid threats, foreign interference, information manipulation, election integrity, but also just the wider context of the transnational security and cooperation between EU member states and partners and allies. So just to summarize or make sure that we are on the same page from the beginning about the concept of the hybrid threats, the way I am going to look at it and discuss today with you is to look at it as an umbrella concept that regroups different types of activities that are either coercive or subversive, led or used by different actors, state actors, non-state actors, who have a specific objectives that are trying to undermine the trust in the democratic institutions and processes, and they do it below the threshold of formally declared warfare. So just to bring the concept together, of course, this incorporates different elements or coming from different sectors or dimensions, from energy security to finance, malign finance to cyber operations to information manipulation, but also more broader economic coercion or the operations in the information space. So what are the main factors of hybrid threats that we need to be aware of is the use of ambiguity. So whenever we have ambiguity, so lack of transparency or lack of clarity, this is a very fertile ground for different actors to abuse, to exploit, and lead operations that can undermine our trust, but also capacity to respond or withstand different threats, in this case, hybrid threats. This can be either at the individual level or collective level. And we have seen, of course, we have a very clear example in Ukraine for already many years, too many years. And also in other countries, Georgia, or even within the European Union or in the United States of America. So these threats are very well led also within already established democracies that have even strong alliances. So we are all here to raise awareness, I think, about this, to also fill the gaps that exist, the vulnerabilities that are being exploited, and to look at the tools that are being used and the tools that we can use to protect democracies and the democratic values. So what is going on at the current state in the EU? What are the problems that we are facing at the moment? There are various problems because different member states are facing different hybrid threats. So one of the issues is that the information manipulation or disinformation is not perceived in the same way, is not always even included as a part of the hybrid threats. And it's not necessarily a concern to national security strategies in some countries. In other countries, it is part already of the national security strategies. Hybrid threats, for example, we have seen have been included into the Czech national security strategy just very recently. Several other countries already adopted as well this language in their national security strategies. Other countries didn't. So we see that there is certain process and certain way to address this even more legally, to look at it from a more harmonized approach, but at the same time try to understand the targeted threats to different states and different actors. Second is that there are different initiatives that are already ongoing at the EU level or at the national level, but there is still a lot that can be done. But what has been already done, just to maybe summarize a few initiatives that are ongoing and that are relevant to our discussion, is the External Action Service activities. There are strategic communications team focusing on the Eastern neighborhood, on South, on Western Balkans. They are looking at different ways to lead campaigns against hybrid threats, to strategic communication efforts to counter these threats, but also coordinate with other units, with other directorates to ensure that we are looking at this issue more holistically. And what does it mean looking at the issues of hybrid threats more holistically? It's to look at it in the cooperation with other actors. So the government, the EU institutions, NATO, and other international organizations, but also incorporate into the decision shaping and discussions, media organizations, civil society, and the private sector, which sometimes poses challenges to make sure that we can all agree on certain points that bring us forward to counter the hybrid threats. Also, there has been established rapid alert system. This rapid alert system goes beyond these traditional networks and includes also the countries from G7, so NATO, EU, and G7 countries, and is meant to not only enhance the sharing of information between these countries, but also have concrete points of contact that can be addressed or alerted in case of the crisis or the need, and also increase the speed of these efforts to counter the threats. Another one that I'd like to point out, of course, is the Center of Excellence on Hybrid Threats, and we are very grateful to have the speaker, and I'm looking forward to the discussion with Yuka further on this. This is a European center, so it's not neither NATO or EU. It's both. It has different member states, but not all the member states of the EU or NATO are members of the Center of Excellence. So this is I think, an opportunity still to deepen these cooperations between the states. And one other thing I would like to mention is the code of practice on disinformation, which brings me to the point of the cooperation with the private sector as well. This code of practice on disinformation is a good tool, is a good measure to build on, to enhance the cooperation with the social media companies, but at the same time to encourage them to enhance their tools to counter information manipulation across their platforms, but also others, as these manipulated messages and narratives are actually traveling between different platforms, even those that are not signatories of the code of practice on disinformation at the current state. So what can be done? So we know that there are tools used by the actors. There are measures that we have already been adopting. There are a lot of problems from undermining the trust, increasing the sense of insecurity, exploiting the vulnerabilities that are existing, the loopholes in our financial systems, in our information systems, in our security systems, and others. So what can be done? What should be done? So there can be different levels of responses, but they have to be multi-level, that's for sure. So in case of addressing the hybrid threats that are multi-layered, we also have to think of these tools of response in the multi-layered sense, in the multilateral sense, but also in the transnational sense. And that's one of the good ways to share the lessons learned. I think Ukraine, for example, as we have already heard, and there is so much more to learn from, Ukrainian example is only one example where many times we feel we know already everything, but there are actors on the ground that are facing the threats on a daily basis that could also perhaps be more engaged in the conversations to share their experience and also relate to other citizens in other countries, as many times there is also the agency put on the citizens to counter these threats on their own, to educate themselves, to increase their media literacy, to digital literacy. But there is also responsibility from the institutional actors, such as the governments or the EU institutions or others, to help counter those threats more effectively. So what has been done is the raising of situational awareness between also NATO and EU, strategic communications efforts, cybersecurity, but also crisis prevention measures. One of the ways, I think, which is very good is the exercises. From my experience, I have seen that exercises and simulations really contribute to building the resilience and understanding the threats in a better way and be better prepared. And I think this is an excellent tool that has been already explored also with the Center of Excellence on hybrid threats, but also between the member states. And I would encourage everyone to try to look for the opportunities to be part of these exercises. Sometimes they are in a broader scale, including also the civil society. But also other thing to keep in mind is the innovation. And I think investing in different innovative organizations, tools, different digital technologies is an opportunity. Cyber operations, of course, are exploiting the current technological advancements, but we have amazing opportunities to actually also invest more in more innovative ways to also be more effective in countering such threats. And I have seen the signal of John that I will have to summarize. So I would just like to encourage you to come up with some questions so we can actually have a discussion and conversation on this, and perhaps even share your experience and your lessons learned. Thank you.
Thank you very, very much. And perfectly within your timing. Excellent. Right, so we started off with a very broad view on what hybrid threats were. We zoomed in a little bit on so what are these threats actually. But now we're just going to call spade a spade. So Susan, our gracious host, for one, so thank you again very much for hosting this very important timely event. But again, you're also a researcher on a very specific playbook, the Russian playbook. So please talk us through what is actually one of those adversaries that Yuka mentioned. What are they doing? And then hopefully also, what are we going to do about it? Okay. The floor is yours.
And ladies and gentlemen, it's our pleasure to welcome you, such a distinguished guest. Today, I'm going to talk about decoding a contemporary Russian playbook, and I want to begin with a quick overview and background. Next slide, please. To understand the Russian playbook deeply, I have examined the Russian actions and counteractions since 2007 and made cross-case analysis using computational techniques. And so I will mention 3 main points to give an overview. First, as you see, Russia demonized nation building elsewhere in the former Russian Empire. And accordingly, the ongoing Russian aggression clearly reflects the Russian strategy to back up its great power vision. And secondly, to prevent Western expansion, Russia wants to keep post-Soviet allies or states politically weak, economically dependent to Russia, and their borders unsettled. And furthermore, I would like to highlight Russian enablers, such as frozen conflicts, a new way of Russian warfare, and accordingly, Russian malign economic and political influencers in Europe. Finally, recent experiences strongly suggest that the period of soft balancing ended, and the year 2007 clearly marked the beginning of hard balancing or hybrid balancing. Next, please. Against this backdrop, next, please. We can start with the general view of Russian new way of warfare. The character and the fundamental rules of the war have changed. What we are witnessing today is a new way of warfare, mostly employing disruptive technologies, high-tech cyber and hybrid threats, especially. In this frame, Russian way has 6 interconnected dimensions, as seen on the slide. And employing disruptive technologies is the key cross-cutting issue. To obtain a deep understanding or insight on the role of disruptive technologies, first we need to explore actions and counteractions in each dimension, as well as hyperconnectivity or relations or patterns among these events. So we can move the next slide, please. We can move to general concept of computational approach that I use. I do not want to go into details. Overall, there are 4 stages, starting from data ingestion and ending with simulations. Next, please. In line with this concept, in the event recognition phase, by the way, events represents actions and counteractions, such as cyber espionage, disinformation campaign, deepfake news, little green man operation, etc. And I have divided recognized Russian actions and counteractions into 4 different groups: overt, covert, direct, and indirect, and cluster around 2 phases: shaping and intervention phases. Next slide, please. Then for classifying and clustering this event, next slide, please. These events, using computational techniques, I develop a multi-layer event classification model. The first layer is a modern warfare event classification model, which divides events into 4 quadrants. The horizontal axis covers the Russian events from covert to overt, and the vertical axis displays the spectrum from direct and indirect. For instance, the left upper quadrant, namely direct covert, contains cyber espionage, disinformation campaigns, election interfering, little green man operation, and the likes. Next slide, please. After that, as a second layer for classification, I use conflict intensity spectrum. Events executed by Russia are categorized in 5 levels of intensity, from dispute to war. Alongside the conflict intensity spectrum, all Russian events are clustered, as I mentioned before, around 2 phases, namely shaping and intervention phases. As you see, the nexus of these 2 phases is violent crisis. I will touch upon the importance of a violent crisis later on. Next slide, please. Now we can turn to mapping of the Russian playbook. This mapping is just one outcomes of the study. The slide is very busy, I know, but I will try to explain in a simple way. As I mentioned earlier, each axis has two layers. That's why we call it multi-layer. Proximity accounts for hyperconnectivity or strong relations with the events which are close by. And further, the positions of the events along the axis indicate patterns and provide inputs for our simulations for the probability of occurrence of the next events. During the shaping phase, Russia mostly uses non-kinetic and non-military tools. It's very logical. But if deterrence fails or Russia wants to intentionally escalate the crisis, a transition will take place, I mean, from shaping to intervention. The key characteristic of intervention phase is always operating below the legal threshold of war. And use of disruptive technologies, as I mentioned, a cross-cutting way is also visible in all phases. Finally, I would like to mention the nexus. Please recall that the nexus representing violent crisis. As you see, comparing the distribution of other events, the nexus and intensity of the events related to violent crisis is also clearly visible in this chart. Next slide, please. Now, I would like to end with some key takeaways. There are 6 things to consider. First distinct feature is exploiting legal gap and geopolitical inertia. Russia starts one-sided move, then creates or develops facts and waits for sanctions. Secondly, digitalized political warfare, which is the key instrument of great power politics, becomes more evident in Russian case. Thirdly, the gray zone tactics, which are a covered subset of great power competition, and short of conventional war, requires a clear spatial attention. Ambiguity, as Rada mentioned, and the deniability are the defining characteristic of the gray zone tactics. Accordingly, the nexus, the violent crisis, as seen in all cases, is too hard or too late for the third parties to mitigate or respond or counter if the crisis or conflict passes this critical age. Therefore, the threshold for the rule-based international order is a violent crisis to counter Russian aggression. Fifthly, in the long run, from my perspective, Russian outdated imperialism will alienate its natural allies and will be more counterproductive among new generations in the post-Soviet region. Lastly, Russian playbook can be easily translated in other capitals, as well as by malign non-state actors as a new way of warfare against Europe or Western civilization. That concludes my presentation. Thank you for listening.
Thank you, Mr. Susan. I think that was a very, very specific on really what are the tools or what our adversaries do. And if I then make or abuse my position as moderator to then right away ask the first question. Seeing that a lot of these shape activities are below threshold, do you think it's possible to forecast these kind of events? And then should we now, after taking Georgia as sort of the first one after 12 years, be able to, well, sort of know ahead of time when Russia's gonna take something out of the toolbox and use it against us?
Of course, actually, the core purpose of this study is predicting malign states' behaviorist patterns. I prefer the term hybrid intelligence instead of AI, because we are using human and machine agents symbiotically to predict malign actors such as a malign state or non-state actors or terrorist group, whatever you can call. So we can predict their behavioral patterns, as I try to show in the mapping of the Russian playbook. So we use in our system, objects represents a state, an individual, a leader, a terrorist group, etc. And at the events represent, as I said, action or counteractions. So we try to map the relations between object to object, event to event, event to object, and maps the relations between those objects and events. Then our algorithms and with the help of subject matter experts, I mean human agents, we can easily predict the malign states, actors, behavioral patterns in advance to mitigate or response or to give a preemptive response to those actors.
Excellent. So it should be possible. Questions, are we then going to do it? That's the next question. But we'll first open up to the floor. If anyone has a question, please state your name and your affiliation and try to keep it short to a question. The gentleman on my left.
News Agency of Ukraine. I hope you hear me now. Dmitry Shkurko, National News Agency of Ukraine. I just want to thank Yuka for very good report, and just mention that comparison of the current Kremlin and Beijing regimes, like a post-communist, is quite risky, because obviously we have a kleptocratic regime in Kremlin and still Communist Party in Beijing. So that what is the common between them is the absence of any moral breaks, let me say so, in conducting the hybrid and attacks against us, against Ukraine, against Europe, and against the civilized world. So my question is, do you, as Europeans, have some kind of breaks? Because we all know that the thief always have some kind of privilege in front of the honest person, because honest person cannot allow himself to do something, for example, to break a law, to don't follow the democratic principles, freedom of speech, and so on and so forth. So my question is, how deeply you feel that kind of uncertainty, let me say so, in fighting with the kleptocratic and totalitarian regimes. Thanks.
Thank you. Yuka, are you still with us digitally? If we can get you on screen.
Indeed, here I am. Do you hear my voice now?
Yes, we can hear you. Lovely. Since you were named, we'll be able to respond to the gentleman's question.
Well, thank you. And thanks for the note that mapping some nations now as post-communist is risky. Of course, you're right. There is a communist party ruling in China, and what pulls all these strings together is authoritarian. Means that it's not a democratic regime. So just waking up, starting to wake up, that in the core of this conflict, there is this issue of democracy, and the trust of citizens in democracy, which means that we must implement such models as parliamentarianism, and related to that and deriving from the powers of the parliament, various checks and balances in how the society works. And so we don't have easy and fast solutions, but basically this is a struggle of what global people want to see from those who hold the power, and in what kind of systems they want to live. So this will be a long struggle. But and we have so unfortunately there are so many pros for the authoritarian regime, as this discussion already showed. They will be they can hold the strategic planning up to longer periods, because our governments change every 4th year. And we can have a total strategy shift as immediately after 4 years in every nation, whereas the authoritarian model keeps up the leadership much longer. And on the other hand, if talking also of forecasting, as was asked from the previous speaker, so they can decide on an operational turn as a matter of one night, which doesn't happen in democracies either. So this is a perilous adversary, but only I can say that in the very long run, the people want to live under a democracy, and this is the key weapon. Thank you.
All right, thank you very much, Jukka. I think there was also a question on the right side. Sir, please state your name and your affiliation.
Bernard Siman from the VUB. I would like to highlight two threats in the economic area, which I think emphasizes or underlines the importance of the point that was mentioned about private-public cooperation. The first threat, and both are threats that are underway. The first one is the exploitation of the negative cash flows of companies because of COVID to launch acquisition bids, particularly where there are IPs relating to technology. And the second is the use of ESG, legitimate ESG issues, environmental, social, and governance issues, to try to gain control of the boards of listed companies and change management and potentially break them up. And I think in both cases, enabling the flow of information between the private sector and the public sector is going to be key to building resilience. And to that end, it is, I think, extremely important to develop a framework that doesn't exist at the moment. The private sector doesn't really talk to the public sector, and the public sector is loath to share information with the private sector. And unless we build that framework, that resilience will disappear. And I think time is of the essence on this one. Thank you.
All right. Thank you, sir. See that we exactly have 3 minutes left. 1.5 minutes for each of you, since we mentioned economic, one of the 6 dimensions, and we've talked about resilience. Nadia, would you go first?
Sure, and I think the question on democracy, as well as, of course, cooperation between different sectors or countries is crucial. I'd like to just come back perhaps to the democracy and the appeal of democratic values. I think that's something that is so strong that the authoritarian regimes do not have, and also the number of the democracies and the fact that there is a potential to build alliances with other democracies and gain also information and cooperate and use the tools that exist, not reinvent the wheel every single time, is extreme benefit that the democracies have in comparison to authoritarian regimes. And yes, democracy cannot be for granted. We see how vulnerable it can be and how we need to protect it on a daily basis, and how we need to engage citizens and different actors to ensure that they do trust the governments and the other leading actors to actually support and protect their rights. But at the same time, rights bring responsibilities. And I think this is a kind of a circle that we need to just continue fueling this cycle of trust and of responsibilities on all the sides. But the fact that we have already managed to recognize and acknowledge and identify different hybrid threats up to today is something we did not have before, even if the hybrid threats were led before, for many years, much more before the illegal annexation of Crimea. So now the raising of the awareness has already reached certain status where we can already be more active in implementing the tools that we have managed to develop, but also I think continue building the partnerships, yes, with different sectors, but also with different countries who have experience from Russian or Chinese or other state, non-state actors interference. And here I'm talking also beyond the European continent, United States, Australia, Japan, or of course, in other neighborhoods as well. So I would just say building partnerships and alliances is something, democratic alliances is our strength.
So,
closing remark.
Remember that I mentioned Russian new way of warfare has 6 interconnected dimensions. So countering or mitigating or responding to such high-tech threats employing disruptive technologies definitely requires a whole of government, whole of society efforts, and building interfaces between public and the private sectors. Otherwise, our efforts never be enough to respond to such threats or risks emanated from the malign actors, including non-state actors, not only states.
Excellent. Well, we're exactly at 10:45. I'm very excited with being straight on time like this. So we'll take a short 15-minute break for coffee. Do take into account we're still having a pandemic, so please social distance yourself a little bit. Thank you very much to our speakers, Yuka, for introducing us broadly and then zooming in, eventually ending up to the actual playbook with a very solid question on the back on a very specific economic threat that's probably somewhere in that playbook as well. We also set a little bit of stage already for the next panel. So props to Fatih for designing how the agenda is looking like. But we will focus a bit more on legal aspects, or lawfare, as you might call it, cyber, and then finishing off with defending democracy. So thank you very much for joining us. The people who are joining us online, please do reconvene us at 15 minutes and use the hashtag and the tag on Twitter to engage with us for questions. Thank you very much. Right, welcome back, or for those who are joining us online, welcome to the second panel of today. So if you wasn't with us this morning, we started off very broadly on sort of the wider threats and slowly zooming into the Russian playbook. A couple of things that were mentioned in this morning which are relevant for today is that we touched upon legal aspects, which we will delve into a bit more this part, on cyber and on the need for resilience and democratic values and how to go about that. So with that, we have an excellent panel. Again, 3 people joining us physically and 1 online. So if you would allow me, Professor Marushak, if you're with us digitally, we have a visual. Do we have audio?
Yeah. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm here.
Excellent. Right. So I'm not going to do the whole list, but you have a very wonderful CV, a Doctor of Law, Professor Laureate of State Province of Ukraine and Security and Technology. So really the nexus, if you will, of legal aspects, lawfare, but also of technology. If I may, would you be able to start off our panel, both sketching a little bit of what the situation is, and then focusing on your question whether Ukraine could develop, well, I think they could and they should, a counter-disinformation system using this cybersecurity. So it's not always a threat, it can also be a solution. And we'll ask you to take 7 minutes to do that, because again, we're going to be strict on timing.
Okay. First of all, I would like to thank the organizers, the NGO Beyond the Horizon, as well as the Embassy of Ukraine in Belgium for the invitation. Unfortunately, I cannot participate in in-person discussion due to COVID aftermath, but hopefully next time could participate in this professional conversation. I'm not authorized today to represent the National Academy of the Security Service officially, or to represent the position of the Security Service of Ukraine. But I also represent the NGO International Information Academy, which was founded in Ukraine in 2018 in order to disseminate the truth about the events in information realm. And I would like to mention the sentence of Hassan Suzan that disinformation is a part of hybrid Russian warfare. And that is why there is a strong links between cyber attacks and information operations or campaigns as a part of hybrid warfare. I would like to compare the legal and institutional background both for cybersecurity and for counter-disinformation levels. Let me start from the very beginning. And I would like to mention that recently the legislative work on cybersecurity strategies has been quite active in Ukraine. The law on basic principles of cybersecurity in Ukraine 2017, new cybersecurity strategy of Ukraine 2021, other bylaws came into force. Work is being done on improving domestic legislation in the field of critical information infrastructure protection. You maybe know that the draft law on critical infrastructure has been already at the final stage in the parliament. At the level of bylaws, for example, Act on Vulnerability Detection and Response to Cyber Incidents and Cyber Attacks authorizes State Center for Cyber Defense of the State Service for Special Communication and Information Protection responsible for detection and counteraction. The need to establish the same structure to the counter-disinformation system could be one of the ways of its development. However, there may be a different approach. An independent, non-profit organization such as EU Disinfo Lab focused on tackling sophisticated disinformation campaigns targeting Ukraine. I also would like to mention that the legislation in counter-disinformation area should be implemented strictly in line with freedom of speech and freedom of expression standards, and in adherence with the Universal Declaration of Human Rights and other relevant instruments. In Ukraine, there was an unsuccessful attempt to represent the draft law on disinformation in 2020. This initiative provoked sharp criticism from Ukrainian and Western media experts. They pointed out that the new norms introduced by this act could be used easily to silence journalists and lead to significant government control of media. A little bit about institutional background. Nowadays, there is progress in sharing responsibilities of the state agencies in cybersecurity area. National Cybersecurity Coordination Center monitors security and defense sector stakeholders. State Service for Information Protection provides the regulation in the cybersecurity domain. The Security Service of Ukraine, intelligence, and other agencies have their own authority according to cybersecurity legislation. On the other hand, Ukraine started with actions in counter-disinformation realm. As you all know, the sanctions against owners of some Russian information services and social networks were imposed in 2017 based upon decision of the National Security and Defense Council of Ukraine. In February 2021, sanctions were imposed on 3 so-called oligarch Medvedchuk channels. They were key platforms for the spread of pro-Russian anti-Western narratives. By the way, the US legislation legal analysis provided by the representative of the International Information Academy facilitated YouTube's access ban to the accounts of the TV channels. You can see on the next slide. I can but mention that the development of the governmental structures to counter disinformation started in March 2021, when in order to achieve the goals and objectives of the National Security Strategy of Ukraine, the Center for Countering Disinformation, CCD, was established as the body of the National Security and Defense Council of Ukraine, whose responsibilities are identifying and countering disinformation, propaganda, etc. In March 2021, the Center for Strategic Communications and Information Security was established in the Ministry of Culture and Information Policy, with the main objectives which included the development of counter-narratives to Russian Federation information campaigns, the inclusion of Ukrainian narratives in the daily communication of the government, etc. The last entity provides more visible activities than CCD, maybe because it has strategic communications as one of the objectives, or due to the fact that CCD is involved in collaboration with security and defense agencies where process of disinformation operations detection and response actions could contain classified or sensitive information. On the next slide, you can see some activities and projects provided by YouTube, by Facebook and Google. And according to Thomson Reuters and BBC Media Action research, social media and search engines are the 2 most popular sources of news and information in Ukraine. One of the main goals of the CCD should be establishing a fruitful cooperation with social media companies, especially with Facebook and Google. In the nutshell, being under Russian aggression, Ukraine can and should amend domestic legislation towards providing mechanisms to prevent, detect, and respond to Russian disinformation campaigns. Having said that, I mean Ukraine should provide mechanisms to raise national interests in information realm. The legal concern is the extent to which the governmental structures authority respect freedom of speech, privacy, and rule of law principles. My understanding is that the state cannot exercise influence on the development of a reliable news network and the fact source checking process, apart from the official governmental platform. Second, developing and enhancing algorithmic criteria for prior detection of disinformation, as well as flagging and dispelling it, is the responsibility of social media companies due to their technical capacity. At the end, I'm going to tell that such a procedure could involve CCD's proposal to National Security and Defense Council based on security and defense agencies analysis and civil society organization, media, academia inputs, especially in fact source checking. Thank you very much for your attention. I would be glad to answer questions after the panel.
Thank you very much, Professor. Thank you for joining us online. We'll quickly move on to the next speaker, and then we'll get back to you in the Q&A. Doctor.
Sure, let me speak from here.
Dr. Ashef is the CUE at Cyber Unit Technology and Cyber School. And again, we're still focusing on the cyber bit, but this time on the occupation, the illegal annexation of Crimea. Dr. the floor is yours.
Yeah, hello everyone. Thank you for inviting for such an important event. So finally, technical guys like owners of technical companies speak together with the political guys at the one scene. It's very important for us because it's not possible like to have good results without cooperation between technical and politicals. So yeah, I'm a CEO and co-founders of Cyber Unit Technologies and also Cyber School. It's a school of white hat hackers. A couple of words about myself. So we are working worldwide. We have offices in 5 countries, and now we popularizing the concept of white hat hackers, of using white hat hackers for especially for the object of critical infrastructures, not only in Ukraine but also in other countries. We are also developing several international papers for legislative cybersecurity reforms in Ukraine. And not only cybersecurity, but also in blockchain industry. I'll explain you why I'm talking about the blockchain industry a bit later. So we are providing cybersecurity services for blockchain industry, and now our students and our graduates from our educational product cyber school, they working on defense of the office of the president of Ukraine 24/7. So today we are going to speak about cyber occupation of Crimea. It's actually a new phrase and new topic. If you try to Google this phrase, you will find nothing, because actually now we are creating a history together with you, because cyber occupation is really new topic for discussion. And the world is changing, and we observe and actually not only observe but also feel in Ukraine a lot of this evolution of hybrid wars, and Ukraine is a target of Russian hybrid warfare, and this is unique case study for the whole world for discussing and for studying what's going on inside of our country. So about 10 months ago, together with CCSI Global, it's US non-government organization, we started to investigate this topic of cyber occupation of Crimea, and not only Crimea, but also Soviet frozen conflict zones. And we discovered that Russians' deployment of digital and information tools and strategies to occupy territories represents a significant escalation of warfare in digital world. But it's very important that the scope of this digital aggression is unknown even to policymakers at the moment. And this is actually what we should develop all together with you. So we created working group. It's now, so far it's only 9 people from Ukraine, and we through research with this working group, with these participants of this working group, we found evidence. Sometimes it's direct, sometimes it's indirect evidence of the following methods that enable cyber occupation. I'm going to mention a couple of these methods to you, and we can discuss them after all. So number one is establishment of pro-Russian industries like cryptocurrency mines that create bitcoins and drive up energy prices, sometimes cause to blackout. So number two, it's establishment of digital crime enterprise in occupied territories. For example, different hubs for the creation and exchanges of anonymous virtual assets. I can give you an example that from not official people who visit in Crimea time to time, they explain that you can easily change bitcoins to fiat money, like to US dollars or Russian rubles anytime. And so we can see that some bitcoins going to Crimea or from Crimea anytime, but it's actually bypassing sanctions, worldwide sanctions. So you cannot send officially money to Crimea, but you can send bitcoins, and you can even create bitcoins in Crimea and send it to worldwide. And this is like what we should understand at the moment. Number three, a wild array of tracking and cyber attacks that remove pro-Ukrainian leaders from social media. So it's a big question, like how we can to fight against this problem, because the main office, for example, of Facebook's for our region is in Russia, and it's not easy to compete with the main office of this region. So number four, it's a public database organized by pro-Russian leaders, labor pro-Ukrainian activists in order to prevent them from moving across borders. So there are plenty of lists where people can see if you are in list, it's not allowed to you to go through a border to Crimea, in some case. Okay, number five is occupied databases like driver licenses, banks accounts, properties registers, to no longer recognize Ukrainian Crimea data and thus ownership. So they just occupied our registers, and if you have Ukrainian license, you cannot prove it in Ukraine anymore. So this is part of cyber occupation. And number six is systematic media campaigns against Ukraine. You know what does it mean? We see it every day. A wide array of disinformation tactics in social media, also the discreditation of pro-Ukrainian leaders. And number eight is occupying media changing radio and TV signals in the Crimea region to play pro-Russian media. So this is only beginning of our research. So it's only concept of this cybersecurity occupation of Crimea, cyber occupation of Crimea. And we made a couple, some work, and we also presented this our very first results during Crimea platform in Ukraine. It was a very successful event, by the way. And we also present these results to the first Deputy Minister of Foreign Affairs of Ukraine, Nadia Kavalchikova. We also presented these results to Anton, who is a permanent representative of the President of Ukraine in Crimea. So it's only beginning of its, let's say, MVP of the big road, big story. So we actually, and it's not only this results that we receive after some investigations. It could be used not only for Ukrainian region, but also for any other region worldwide, because it's only beginning of cyber occupation of territories. So we are really interested for international cooperation. We are open for partnership. So please contact us. Let's do some helpful work together. And thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much, Doctor. Now, we've heard two very specific speakers on well, a whole range of issues. Wasn't 9 or 10 in total? So now my question to you, Mr. Tong, is what's the European Commission doing about this?
Maybe I also
You also
take
want
the
to
floor
well, of
over
course,
there,
of course.
if I can.
Of course,
Or
it's
maybe
not.
I don't know, maybe it's more comfortable to speak there while sitting.
Yes,
Of
thanks
course.
a lot for this question, and thanks a lot for inviting me to attend this seminar on a very important topic. I represent Support Group for Ukraine, which basically deals with Ukraine in the broadest sense of the word, not only cyber threats, hybrid threats, but all other aspects of Ukraine development and reforms. And we also, besides designing support for Ukraine, we also are leading in many other areas on the reform and policy dialogue. Well, I think that I would like to make three main points. I think the first very important issue to raise, to mention, is that from the EU's point, it is very clear that Ukraine is under a terrible, significant threat from outside partner. And this includes not only the conflict in the east, but also the hybrid, including cyber and the disinformation attacks. And I think that from the EU's point of view, we have recognized it at various occasions. If you followed the EU-Ukraine summit that took place a few weeks ago, we also saw that the president of the European Commission raised it. You saw that the president of the Council of European Council raised it. So definitely very much on the agenda of the EU-Ukraine relations. I think I should also add that from our side, there is a very strong wish to be engaged with Ukraine. Ukraine is the eighth partner around the world with whom we launch the cyber dialogue. Ukraine is the first Eastern Partnership country with whom this dialogue was launched. And this dialogue is exactly for this purpose, to basically learn from Ukrainian experience, share our best experience, and also discuss the possibilities how to enhance our cooperation, how to integrate further Ukraine into some of the EU institutions that deal with cybersecurity. Now, this is the first point. The second point, I think it is very important to look at how Ukraine has reacted to the cyber threats. And cyber is always, if there are cyber threats, there is always this possibility to react by closing the internet, to turning your back to digital. Ukraine has done exactly the opposite. I think the way Ukraine has made steps towards making the state duly digital is impressive. Ukrainian friends and partners surely know the TIA platform, which has been made available for Ukrainian citizens, and within a very short period of time, basically more than 7 million people are using this platform. And I mean, this shows how much this wish of offering to citizens the benefit of digitalization, while being at the same time also aware of the threats, how much this has been the part of government's agenda. And from the EU side, we definitely welcome this. I think I should also say that what we consider very positive is that Ukraine has taken a very clear commitment to align itself with the EU legislation and standards. This is about the NIS directive, Network Information Security Directive, also other cyber acquis, critical infrastructure protection acquis of the European Union, but also the 5G toolbox of the European Union. This is very important for us, and of course we encourage this. And it's also important in terms of future integration of further integration of Ukraine with the EU digital single market. Third point about our support. We have worked together with Ukraine on cyber issues and supporting them for many, many years. This work has been in the mode of very much stepping up the support. So starting perhaps more with the softer instruments, with more with knowledge sharing, and then progressing further. We have supported the closing of the gaps in the legislation, also on cybersecurity strategy of Ukraine. I think colleague earlier speaking mentioned that this new strategy was adopted just recently. And also very important, the operational preparedness. I was not here in this hall when the previous panel was convened, but I tried to hear through the internet, and I think somebody mentioned the exercises, cyber exercises. Basically, we have agreed with Ukraine that we organize cyber exercises through our project, to our digital program twice, at least twice a year. And the most recent exercise took place in September this year, and it was considered success with many teams from different institutions participating and also appreciating that this simulation really contributes to the overall preparedness to cyber attacks. And of course, we can do more. We will try to bring in more, let's say, more strategic and also more long-term way the EU member state cybersecurity experience. We will soon launch a twinning program, and the EU cybersecurity agencies can be part in implementing this. This will also involve having in place a resident twinning advisor who will then work with some of the main cybersecurity interlocutors, mostly the State Service for Special Communication and Information Protection. And maybe a final point, we are also exploring possibilities how to support Ukraine in the area of cyber in the defense sector. And then I think this is something that still needs to be discussed and agreed internally in the EU, but I think that there is definitely further potential there. Thanks a lot for inviting me, and ready to take any questions that you may have. Thanks.
I think particularly on the last point that we can have a very good Q&A about. But before we go to the Q&A, we have one last, I think it was described as activists and advocates. So I'm quite fond of that. So we're ending well on a call to action note with Defend Democracy. Yeah. Alice, the floor is yours.
Yes. Hello, everyone. When preparing my talk, I realized that in a way, the year 2021 is kind of an anniversary, though not a happy one. But I will aim to end my talk on an optimistic note. In 1989, some thought that history had ended. It was the end of communism in Europe, of the Soviet Union, and of the Cold War. It opened the door to German unification, an unprecedented European Union stretching from Lisbon to Tallinn, and the enlargement of Nato. While I'm not a historian, based on my observations, I would argue that for Europe, history took off again in 2014. 2014 was a key year for Europe, in particular for Ukraine, but also for Europe as a whole. And in hindsight, 2014 was also a key year for geopolitics and democracy. A quick timeline, though not complete, but you're probably all familiar with it. February 2014, Russia's illegal occupation of Crimea, still ongoing. April 2014, Russian aggression in eastern Ukraine, still ongoing. July 2014, Russia downs flight MH17 in Ukraine. Almost 300 innocent people died. 200 of them, almost 200 of them, were my compatriots. I'm from the Netherlands. 2014 was also the year of trolls and bots. Did you know that the Russian troll factory, their highest output ever, was not the US election of 2016? It was around the downing of MH17. In October 2014, Russia attacks a Czech ammunition depot. December 2014, Russia says it wants to bypass Ukraine as a gas transit. February 2015, Gazprom warns of serious risks for gas transit to Europe. Sounds familiar? Spring 2015, Russia hacks the German parliament. June 2015, Russia starts Nord Stream 2 to bypass Ukraine. And then, of course, there's 2016. Russia interferes not only with Netherlands' referendum on the EU-Ukraine association agreement, but also with Brexit and with the US elections, and so on to today. So at the time working as a digital strategist, almost 24/7 online on the front line of European geopolitics, I saw trolls, bots, propaganda, disinformation, and influence operations in an early stage. By 2016, I was so concerned about Russia's interference in our democracies that I decided to do something about it. The result is the Defend Democracy Foundation. Our mission is to defend and strengthen democracy against foreign and domestic and technological threats. Because, of course, pointing the finger only at the Kremlin is too easy. Protecting, strengthening, and supporting democracy starts with getting our own house in order. We must prove democracy works at home, not just because we want the best form of government to deliver for our people, but also if we want to be credible abroad. And don't get me started on the many technological threats to democracy, especially social media. These are worth an entire talk in itself. A recent overview of research shows that digital platforms are key facilitators of polarization, which of course affects democracy. Think about it. If there is one thing that and foreign interference and domestic populism and tech platform business models have in common, it is polarization. So as long as tech platforms have polarization as their business model, it can and will be abused by authoritarian adversaries to further polarize our societies. Which means that our public debate, our shared reality, and therefore our democracy remain at risk until we change that business model. So I urge democracies to team up and disrupt polarization as a business model for tech platforms and as a vector for hybrid warfare. However, while we must therefore deal with domestic and technological threats to democracy, we cannot let the Kremlin and other adversaries, including China, get away with malicious interference in our democracies and societies. And we're obviously not going to succeed by each country acting on its own. We need collective deterrence and countermeasures. The EU and its member states do not currently have a specific regime of sanctions related to foreign interference and disinformation campaigns orchestrated by foreign state actors. The EU must strengthen its deterrence tools so that malicious foreign actors have to pay the cost of their decisions and bear the consequences. As the European Parliament's Special Committee on Foreign Interference Rights, we need an EU coordinated strategy against foreign interference and adequate financial resources aimed at equipping the EU and its member states with appropriate resilience policies and deterrence tools, enabling them to tackle all hybrid threats and attacks orchestrated by foreign countries. The committee says that this strategy should be built on 1. Common definitions, critical and ex-post impact assessment of the legislation adopted so far, as well as understanding and situational awareness of the issues at stake. 2, concrete policies enabling resilience building among EU citizens in line with democratic values. 3, appropriate disruption capabilities. And 4, diplomatic and deterrence responses in a global context. Now, the good news, NATO and the EU, while NATO is a military alliance, the EU is a peace project. But as the line between war and peace has grown thinner since 2014, NATO and EU are working more closely together. There's now even a dedicated task force on EU-NATO relations. It brings together knowledge and expertise from inside the EU's External Action Service and coordinates with other EU actors to strengthen the EU-NATO partnership. Also very important is the role of civil society. It has already been mentioned. Since warfare has shifted from conventional to hybrid, it's no longer just soldiers who are involved in a war. It's now also us, civilians. Protecting democracy and the constitutional order and framework of values that underpin it is a matter of national security to all democratic nations. An active, vibrant, and strong civil society is thereby part of what makes democratic nations more secure. This link is even more pertinent in the era of hybrid threats, which are complex, ambiguous, and unpredictable. In the current security environment, states and societies must be resilient to multiple stresses and shocks in order to be able to endure hardship and remain functional under duress. National resilience is a popular concept in national security policymaking, and civil society has rightfully emerged as its pivotal component. Almost to the end. NATO, in their June summit, also stresses resilience and the role of civil society. I quote, "We have agreed today a strengthened resilience commitment that sets out further steps we intend to take in the coming years. We will continue to take a whole-of-government approach to enhancing the resilience of our societies and achieving the 7 NATO baseline requirements for national resilience through enhanced civil-military cooperation and civil preparedness, closer engagement with our populations, the private sector, and non-governmental actors, and the centers of expertise on resilience established by allies." So, to conclude, whether we like it or not, whether we are ready or not, history is back. We'd better make sure not just to be ready, but to act together, because we are stronger when united. Thank you.
Thank you, Alice, and thank you for ending on a positive note. It's surely uplifts my spirits on a Monday morning. All right, we still have about, say, 5 minutes left on our panel now. So I want to see if there are any questions from the floor. We have one gentleman there, one gentleman over there. We'll take for the gentleman on the right in the gray jacket. Please rise, state your name and your affiliation.
My name is Onur Sultan from Beyond Horizon. My question is to Mr. Tang. I want to understand, and if you possibly could explain to us the depth of the cooperation between EU and NATO, and how that goes on, and how often and how deep this cooperation is. Thank you.
Yes. Yes, I think that this was actually something that I was about to say as a reaction to a colleague who was speaking about this. We do discuss different issues with NATO regularly. And when it comes to cyber, hybrid, disinformation, then not only that we discuss them, we share the experiences, we compare the notes, we actually also do things together. This year, earlier in May, we had a joint seminar on disinformation in Kiev with the high-level participation from both sides at the level of Deputy Secretary General from NATO and also from the EU side, Deputy Secretary General of the Directorate for Neighborhood and Enlargement Issues. And then later this year, I believe in November, we have another event where we will try to go more deep. We are also discussing very concrete projects where we can cooperate together.
And then what I should also say as a third element, definitely on the ground, we share this burden or this responsibility, I would put it this way, to work together with different actors, with the government and with the civil society organizations, most of the times doing our own thing, but then very closely coordinating with NATO. When it comes to cyber, then I think that we are a bit more active on the ground than NATO is. NATO used to have a cybersecurity trust fund, which was very important a few years ago in supporting the military sector and equipment. But at the moment, I think on the civilian side, we definitely dare do a bit more. And always, when it comes to coordinating among donors, then of course we always share the best practices and also see where we could do things further together. Thank you.
Thank you. Alice, anything to add to that?
No, just that I'm very happy to see that EU and NATO are working more closely together. I think that's really important. That was well, I'm not sure if that's me, but in 2016, that was kind of the question I was asking myself, like where is our response, and more importantly, how do we do this together? And so I'm really glad to see that over the course of the years, we're working more closely together.
Then the last question, taking the gentleman in the black jacket.
Murat Çalışkan from University Catholic de Louvain. I have two questions. One is, I think an important part of the discussion today boils down how the liberal democracies will respond to the authoritarian regimes. Because authoritarian regimes has clearly some advantages like quicker decision-making process, and they have ability to think more holistically because central government is more powerful. My question is, what liberal democracies can do against these clear advantages? One thing came to my mind is, while staying within the limits of democratic values and principles, would it be possible, for instance, to improve the national security agencies, authorities, or the practices, for instance? Because in the first part of the discussion also it was discussed that the democracies, every 4 years, the government's regimes change. They don't have long-term strategies. Apart from that, you have this, you mentioned the polarization and others, but would it be possible to take other measures, as I mentioned, that improving national strategy structures?
So we'll leave that one question for the interest of time. Professor Moshak, are you still with us? Because by now my TV screen has gone blank. It clear says it's 45. I'm done. Professor, are you still with us?
Yeah, I'm here.
So could you reply to the gentleman's question on whether there are other ways to develop and strengthen?
My understanding is that the answer is only one. We should develop and enhance cooperation with civil society organizations, with media. It's one of the ways to promote democracy, to promote democratic values. And when we disseminate truth, we are stronger. And the population understand that this is fake, this is disinformation, this is against democratic values, this is inspired operations, and so on. So my answer is only cooperation and of course raising awareness of the population.
Thank you.